Before we begin, take a breath and settle into the silence around you, because what you're about to hear is not just a collection of stories. It is a reminder that the familiar can turn on you in a heartbeat, and the sweet can carry a bitter cost across the quiet corners of America in places both forgotten and bustling. Something has been playing a song, an old jingle, the kind meant to bring children running with coins in their hands and smiles on their faces. But the smiles you will hear about tonight do not end. With ice cream, the sound returns in towns swallowed by time. It plays in underground tunnels, through forests too deep and deserts too dry. It echoes from the windows of old buildings and beneath the stars, in places where no tire should roll, and yet they do. This is not nostalgia. This is not whimsy. This is the quiet terror that comes when something warm becomes something cold. When the melody you remember starts to bend and twist and follow you home. The stories you're about to witness are tied together by more than just the wheels of an ice cream truck. They are bound by the way. Fear grows when sweetness is no longer safe. When we begin to ask what waits at the end of the jingle, these are not stories of strangers. They are stories of memory, of temptation, of places that never forget who stepped too close. So if you are still with us, if you choose to listen, listen carefully. Some sounds are meant to be followed and others are meant to be feared. Let us show you the difference as we begin tonight's journey through 8 true ice cream truck horror stories. As we cross the threshold from memory into shadow, our first story begins, not in the middle of nowhere, but in a neighborhood where the past walks alongside the living. A man returns to Savannah, not expecting to find the echoes he left behind still playing. Not from cassette tapes or radios, but from something rolling slowly past his childhood home. Something with peeling paint and a tune too warped to still be innocent. This is where we begin, where the music never really stopped. Story 1, The Ice Cream Man Who Waited Too Long. The air in Savannah had always held a kind of stillness that made it feel older than it was, like the town was quietly remembering things everyone else tried to forget. When Daniel returned after 17 years away, the streets were exactly as he remembered them. Cobbled and overhung with moss-draped oaks that whispered in the breeze. He came back, not for nostalgia, but for duty. His parents had passed within months of each other, and the house on Liberty Street had become his burden to sort out. He was 32, now older than he ever imagined he'd feel, with more tiredness in his bones than years could explain. The house smelled like old wood and lemon polish. The radio in the kitchen still worked. The attic door creaked the same way it had when he was 12. Everything was the same, and yet something was off. Like the whole neighborhood was caught in a breath. It never let go of. That feeling sharpened on the second night when Daniel, sitting on the porch with a beer and the ghosts of unresolved memories, heard the music. It started soft, distant, like it was blowing in from another time. A jingle childish and nostalgic, warped slightly by distance and humidity. It was the ice cream truck song, the same one he used to chase barefoot in the summer with a crumpled dollar in hand. But that made no sense. There hadn't been an ice cream truck in this neighborhood for over a decade. Not since the incident with the missing boy, the one no one talked about anymore. He stood slowly and walked toward the end of the driveway, heart quickening. The music was growing louder, and then it appeared pale blue and faded with flecking paint and dented corners rolling slowly down Liberty Street. It moved like it was half in this world and half out of it. No headlights, just that haunting tune playing over and over. There were no children, no neighbors watching, just Daniel and the truck. It stopped in front of the house across the street, the one Miss Darlene had lived in before she went into hospice. No one lived there now, but the truck waited. Daniel felt a chill slip down his spine, despite the warmth of the evening. He stepped back, watched the truck linger for a moment longer, then continue down the road and disappear around the bend. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay awake, thinking about how familiar the driver's silhouette had seemed, thin and long-necked, with a cap pulled low and hands gripping the wheel like they were remembering how. The next morning, he walked to the corner store and asked the clerk a kid named Andre, who looked about 11, if he'd seen an ice cream truck lately. Andre said no, but added almost like a secret that he had heard music sometimes when walking home from school. Daniel nodded and thanked him, but didn't say more. He started noticing things after that. Chalk drawings appearing on the sidewalk overnight. The faint smell of freezer burnt near the hedges, and always the music playing briefly in the distance, just enough to make him doubt it was real. On the fourth night, he saw the truck again, this time stopped directly in front of his house. He did not move. He sat on the porch and watched it. The driver never got out. The music played, and then it drove off. The next day, he visited Miss Darlene in the hospice care facility out on the edge of town. She was frail, her eyes cloudy but sharp. When he mentioned the ice cream truck, her mouth tightened. She told him not to follow it, not to engage, that it did not come for everyone. Only the ones who remembered, only the ones who used to believe. That night, Daniel found old newspaper clippings in the attic, buried in a box labeled School Projects. One of the articles was about a child who had vanished on Liberty Street in 1987. The photo showed a small boy with a gap-toothed smile and a melting cone in his hand. Daniel recognized him instantly. It was Matthew, his childhood friend, the one he had tried to forget, the one who had been last seen running toward an ice cream truck that no one else had heard or seen. The next evening, the music returned. This time, Daniel did not stay on the porch. He followed it. Slowly at first, then faster, drawn by something between memory and compulsion. The truck turned down streets he hadn't walked in years. It moved steadily, always, just far enough ahead to be seen but never caught. It finally stopped at the edge of Colonial Park Cemetery, under a tree so large it blanketed half the road in shadow. Daniel approached his legs, weak, breath shallow. The back door of the truck opened with a groan, revealing darkness and cold air that rushed out like a sigh. He stepped forward but stopped when he saw the small shape inside. A boy. Andre. He was shivering, eyes wide with confusion. Daniel pulled him out, held him close, and ran. Behind him, the music cut off, mid-note. When he looked back, the truck was gone. The police never found it. Andre had no memory of how he got there. Miss Darlene died that same week. Peacefully, they said Daniel never saw the truck again, but he kept his porch light on every night just in case. He learned that some memories are not meant to be forgotten, and some stories return not to haunt you, but to ask you to finish them. If you ever find yourself face to face with something that feels too familiar to be true, trust your instincts. Sometimes the past does not want to be revisited, and sometimes it never left. If you're still here with me, still listening, maybe leave a light on tonight. Maybe hit follow so you don't walk this path alone next time. Some streets remember, some songs do too, especially in Savannah. Sometimes the past hides in the streets we grew up on, and sometimes it burrows beneath the concrete deeper than anyone dares to look. Our next story takes us beneath New York City into tunnels long abandoned where the silence has its own pulse, and what once brought joy now echoes in darkness when the music plays underground. It does not call to children, it calls to memory and to the people who remember more than they should. Story 2. The Jingle Beneath Manhattan. Luis had always found comfort in the steady rhythm of the underground. While the world above shifted and screamed in chaos, down below the tunnels hummed with predictability. He was 27, a maintenance worker on the MTA's overnight shift. Someone who liked silence and the forgotten the City Hall station. Was one of those places most people had long stopped caring about. Closed since the 40s, it sat beneath Manhattan like a hidden mouth, curved and ornate and empty. Luis had taken a liking to it, the way some people took to abandoned churches or locked gardens. It was quiet. It was his. He did his rounds like always, flashlight sweeping across dusty mosaics, the sound of his boots echoing in gentle succession. On his third loop that night, as the air felt denser than usual, he heard it. A jingle. Soft. At first thin, as thread, but unmistakable. It was an ice cream truck melody looping the same broken tune over and over. Luis froze. It made no sense. They were 70 feet below street level. There were no ramps, no access roads. He turned off his light and listened harder. The music didn't stop. It grew clearer, more insistent. He followed it. The sound led him deeper into the tunnel, toward a sealed section closed off by rusted gates. Frankie used to joke about this area about a blind vendor who once sold treats down here during the Depression, claiming he could see ghosts in the dark. Luis never paid it much mind. Until now, the gate was ajar. That alone was wrong. No one had keys but transit authorities, and those had been lost to decades. Luis stepped through. The air turned cold. The tiles here were slick with moss and years of condensation. The music continued, but now it was layered with something else. A low hum, mechanical yet organic like breath caught in metal. As he rounded the corner, he saw it. An ice cream truck, parked dead center of the abandoned platform. Faded white with pastel pink stripes, the kind that belonged to another century. The lights were on. The music box, speaker on the roof, spun slowly. Luis did not move. Inside the window was a man wearing a mask, smooth and featureless like ceramic. He did not speak, did not gesture. He simply stared. Luis's legs felt heavy. He turned to leave, but something stopped him. Movement. In the reflection of the truck's panel, he saw a child. Small, maybe 10 eyes, wide and blank. She was walking toward the truck from the opposite tunnel. Her steps were slow, unnatural. Luis shouted without sound, waved his arms, but she didn't stop. As she reached the window, the masked man opened the side door. The light inside flickered. Then they were gone. The truck blinked out. The tunnel was dark again. Luis stumbled back to the gate, hands shaking breath. Shallow. His radio crackled to life with static, but no voice followed. He didn't speak of it. Not at first. In the weeks that followed, he began to notice strange things. Cold spots in the tunnels. Music playing faintly through ventilation shafts. Scratches on the inside of sealed maintenance doors. Then came the disappearances. First a tourist, then a kid from Brooklyn who wandered off on a school tour. No one made the connection, but Luis knew he could feel it. That place was open again. One night he returned. He brought a camera thinking maybe it would help him make sense of it, document something real. But what he found was worse than memory. The truck was back clearer than before. The masked man inside, but this time there were others. Faces staring from the windows. Children, some old, some impossibly young. And in the center, standing as if waiting, was Frankie, Luis's old partner who had gone missing 3 years ago after signing off for a smoke break. His eyes were blank skin, pale mouth stretched into something that was not a smile. Luis dropped the camera and ran. The footage was lost, but the image stayed with him. Faces not quite human anymore. A jingle that seemed to know his name. They said he was stressed, overworked, paranoid. He took a leave of absence, moved to his sister's place in Queens. But the music followed, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in waking, a loop that never quite ends. Luis came to understand something simple. The past never dies in places people forget. It settles in, waits, lures. Not everyone who walks the tunnels goes missing, but those who hear the music never walk quite the same again. He began warning people, tourists, workers, anyone who would listen, stay out of the City Hall station. If you hear music run, don't follow it, don't look into the lights. And for those of you who still think the underground is just steel and stone, know this. There are places in this city where time folds, where sounds echo, not from space, but from memory. If you hear a jingle where no street exists, trust your fear. Some vehicles aren't driven by men anymore. Some only arrive when they're remembered. And if this story made your skin crawl, if it made you pause just once, the next time you're near a subway entrance after dark, then stay with us. Stay curious, but stay cautious. Follow us, not the sound. Some tunnels lead back, others don't. From tunnels buried in steel to mountains wrapped in mist. Our journey moves west to the edge of Crater Lake, a place as breathtaking as it is remote, where still waters reflect more than the sky, and the silence can twist until it hums through your teeth. Here the song returns faint but clear, drifting through fog that should not hold sound, and someone follows it, not knowing what waits between the trees. Story 3. Midnight Scoop at Crater Lake. Riley took the summer job at Crater Lake Lodge for the quiet. At 22, she had grown tired of the loudness of cities and the static buzz of people talking over each other for no reason. She was between years at college, unsure of her major, unsure of herself, floating between decisions like a feather that never landed. The lodge sat high in the Cascades, overlooking a lake that should not exist. A blue so deep it seemed unnatural. The guests came and went. The staff kept their heads down and the night stretched long and cold. She liked the cold. She liked the kind of silence that felt like it could preserve thoughts instead of crushing them. On her third week, there she was put on night duty, inventory checks, garbage removal. Things no one wanted to do while the moon hung low and the fog rolled in from the trees. Marla, the manager, handed her a flashlight and a clipboard and warned her not to take the path behind the lodge. It had been closed since a landslide 2 years ago. Riley nodded, but something in her eyes must have asked too much. Because Marla added that it was unsafe, nothing more. That night, around 2 in the morning, Riley stepped out to the back terrace for air. The mist had rolled in heavier than usual, and the woods below looked like they were breathing. That was when she heard it, the faint sound of an ice cream jingle echoing up the slope. Her breath caught. The melody was slow and slightly warped, like it had been played too many times on a machine too old to care. It made no sense. There were no roads behind the lodge, only the closed trail and steep wilderness. But the sound continued. She told herself it was some local thing, a prank, maybe. She returned inside, finished her checklist, but the song remained in her head like a splinter. The next night she heard it again. Louder, closer. This time she walked to the edge of the terrace and peered down the slope. The fog parted just enough to show a shape. A small, pale vehicle sitting still among the trees like it had grown from the ground instead of driven there. Riley blinked, and it was gone. She said nothing the next morning, but when she went to grab coffee from the staff kitchen, she found Tom already there. He was a guest mid-30s, maybe said he was a travel writer, but never seemed to write anything. He asked if she had heard the music. Riley froze. He said he had followed it once down the old trail and lost time. Came back with mud on his shoes and a gap in memory. That was 3 nights ago, He had not slept since Riley wanted to laugh it off, but couldn't. Something about his eyes. Something about her own fear. The third night, she took a different route on her rounds and ended up near the barricade that marked the trail closure. The music was louder now, like it was waiting for her. She stepped over the barrier and walked into the trees. The fog wrapped around her like water. Every step made the music clearer, but also distorted, like it was pulling her forward but trying to push her back at the same time. After maybe 10 minutes, she saw it. The ice cream truck. It sat in a clearing that should not exist. Old and dented, its headlights flickering weakly. The window was open, and inside sat a girl. She looked no older than 16, wrapped in a faded hoodie, eyes wide and glassy. Riley approached slowly, heart hammering. When she reached the door, the girl looked at her and said nothing, just held out her hand. In it was a popsicle, melting, blood red. Riley stepped back. The girl smiled. Then a slow tilt of the lips that felt wrong in the shape it made. Then the music stopped. The truck blinked. The clearing was empty. Riley stood alone in the fog, her hands shaking her breath too loud. She ran back up the trail over roots and rocks, heart pounding so loud she could not hear her own thoughts. When she returned to the lodge, the sun was rising. Her shoes were soaked, her arms were scratched, and she had no idea how long she had been gone. Marla found her in the lobby, did not ask questions, simply told her she would be transferred to day shifts, said she understood Riley never spoke of it again, but sometimes in the quiet parts of the morning she thought about the girl, the smile, the sound, and she wondered if the forest remembered everyone who wandered in, or just the ones who saw too much. She never walked the trail again, never went near the edge, but she kept listening. Every now and then, when the fog rolled in and the lake turned still, the music came back, just a note or two buried in the wind, like a whisper from beneath the trees. She came to believe something simple. Not everything waiting in the woods is a predator. Some are invitations, and not all sweetness is kindness. Sometimes the things that promise comfort come with a price your mind cannot afford to pay. If you hear music where there should be none, if it calls you when no one else is around, ask yourself if what waits ahead is meant for you or for the part of you that will never return. And if this story unsettled you in ways you cannot explain, if it reminded you of something you once almost followed, then stay. Let us guide you deeper, gently, carefully. You are not alone. Not here. Not anymore. Just remember, not all paths lead back to where you began. Not all places of silence are hidden in the woods. Some lie open beneath the sun, across stretches of desert where time dries out and the wind forgets how to speak along. The old bones of Route 66. An engine hums softly, and a jingle cuts through the emptiness. Not from a speaker, but from something older, deeper, a rhythm that never needed permission to return. Story 4. The ice cream truck that crosses. Route 66. Nate had always liked to drive where the roads forgot themselves. At 19, he had taken a year off from college to figure things out, though he never said that out loud. He told people he was road tripping the classics, hitting the soul of the country, tracing old maps with new purpose. But deep down, he was looking for something quieter than answers. Maybe a kind of silence that could forgive him for not knowing where he was headed. He found that silence near Amboy, California, where Route 66 stretches like a forgotten scar across the desert. The town itself was a relic, a skeleton of signs and sun-blasted buildings, the kind of place people used to stop and now only pass through if they are lost or broken, or both. He camped a few miles out past the empty gas station, pitched his tent under the stars, and let the dry wind speak in the way only the desert could. That night, as he lay watching satellites drift over black sky, he heard something that didn't belong. Faint at first, but undeniably real. The tune of an ice cream truck floating through the stillness like a ghost. He sat up. There were no children here. No houses, no streets with sidewalks or streetlights, just sand and rock and the rustling of something ancient. But the music continued a slow loop that seemed older than he remembered, like it had warped from overuse or distance. He stepped outside his tent and scanned the horizon. In the distance near the curve of the road, a soft glow blinked on and off, too low and too strange to be a vehicle. He watched it for a long time until the music faded and the light disappeared. In the morning, he drove back into Amboy to see if anyone else had noticed. The only place open was the old diner near the motel. Inside, Lila served coffee with a limp and a tired smile. When he mentioned the music, her hand paused mid-pour. She didn't say much, just that some things along this road were better left unacknowledged. That was the first time he felt real fear. Not because of the music, but because of how easily people could live beside something they refused to name. That night, the sound returned. This time it came closer. Nate stood in the dark and saw the truck for the first time. It rolled slowly along the edge of the sand. Headlights, dim paint, cracked and peeling like old sunburnt skin. There were no markings, no logos, only the shape and the song looping endlessly. He watched from the shadow of his car as it pulled to a stop on the road directly in front of his camp. The driver did not get out. The music continued. Then the headlights shut off, and the truck sat silent and still. Nate did not sleep. In the morning, it was gone. No tracks in the sand, no marks on the road, just silence again. The next day, he found the sheriff's office. Martinez was in his late 40s, polite but weathered. When Nate described what he saw, the sheriff stared a little too long before answering. He said, "Tourists sometimes got disoriented out here, the heat playing tricks on the eyes." But his tone lacked conviction, and on the way out, Nate noticed a small freezer in the corner of the office. Inside, it was a single unopened ice cream bar, the label faded and unreadable, the wrapper swollen with air. That night, Nate waited. The truck came again. This time it stopped closer, and he saw the driver. Thin, unmoving eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Though there was no sun, the man looked at him for what felt like hours. Then the back of the truck opened, and a figure stepped out. A boy, maybe 11, with bare feet and a blank face. He walked to the edge of the road and stood still as if listening. Then he turned and disappeared into the desert. Nate followed, not because he wanted to, but because his feet moved before his mind could resist. The boy moved without sound deeper into nothingness, past Joshua trees and dead brush. After what felt like miles, the boy stopped, turned, and vanished. Nate was alone. The truck was gone. The music was gone. And the stars felt farther than they had ever been. It took him hours to find his way back. He collapsed in his tent, shaking, unsure if he had seen what he remembered or remembered what he had seen. The next morning, he drove to the gas station again. Lila saw his face and nodded. She handed him a folded newspaper clipping. It was yellowed and brittle. The headline read, "Local children vanish on Route 66. The date was 1972. There were photos. One of them was the boy he had seen. He asked why no one spoke about it. She said they used to. Then people stopped coming, and so they forgot. But the desert does not forget. Neither does the road. That afternoon, he left. Drove for hours without stopping, without looking back. But the song still found him. Sometimes in the wind through the windows, sometimes in the hum of the tires, and he began to understand. Not all things in this world follow rules. Not all roads lead where maps say. Some take you back to places that never ended. Some remind you that sweet things offered freely often come with a cost. He thought of the boy, of the ice cream bar in the sheriff's freezer, of the truck with no license plate. If you ever find yourself driving down a road that feels too quiet, if you hear music when there should be none, turn around. Trust the unease in your chest. Because some stories don't end when you leave the place. They follow you. They wait. And if this story lingers in your mind the next time you take a road trip, if it makes you hesitate at the sound of a jingle in the night, then maybe it has done what it was meant to do. Stay curious, but stay aware. As the road fades behind us, we find ourselves surrounded by forest again. But this time not as wanderers, but as children playing games. We do not fully understand in the Black Hills. The trees do not sleep. They listen. And when someone says, "Follow the music," they do not always come back. The next story is a lesson in how innocence is not a shield, and laughter does not silence what hides just out of sight. Story 5. He never came back from the clearing. Casey never really wanted to go camping. At 15, she was the kind of girl who preferred screen light to starlight, who liked knowing what was behind every door and under every bed. But when her best friend Mason insisted that their group spend a weekend in the Black Hills forest before summer ended, she said yes. She always said yes to Mason. There were 5 of them in total. A mess of tangled friendships and unspoken crushes packed into 2 tents in a rusted minivan. The forest was old, its trees tall and unmoving, and even during the day, it felt like stepping into a place that had no time. They set up camp near an overgrown trailhead miles from the main road. The first night was uneventful, filled with bad marshmallows and worse ghost stories. But on the second day, Mason found something, a laminated sign nailed to a rotting post nearly hidden by brush. It read, "Follow the song for sweet surprises." They thought it was a joke, a leftover from some failed promotional event or scavenger hunt long forgotten. Mason grinned and suggested a game. At dusk, they would blindfold each other and take turns following any sound they heard. Whoever found the prize would get first pick at snacks for the night. Casey hesitated. Something about it felt off, but she laughed along with the others. That evening, just as the light dipped low and the air turned wet and heavy, they started the game. One by one, they followed rustling leaves, crackling branches, and distant bird calls. Nothing strange at first. But then it was Leah's turn, and she stopped walking after only a few minutes. When they found her, she looked pale. She said she had heard music. Ice cream. Music. It played in the distance, slow and broken, like it was being dragged through mud. Mason's eyes lit up. He loved a good mystery. He insisted they all try again together this time and follow the sound if it came back. So they waited, and just before the last light vanished, the music returned. Casey felt it before she heard it, a low vibration in her chest that pulsed with the rhythm of something not quite right. The melody was familiar, the kind played in the neighborhoods on hot afternoons, but here in the heart of an ancient forest, it was wrong. They moved toward it anyway. Mason led. The path was uneven and winding, the trees closing in like a mouth around them. The music grew louder, but its direction was never clear. They walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper, until they stumbled into a clearing that should not have been there. In the center sat an old ice cream truck, paint chipped and covered in moss windows fogged from the inside. It hummed quietly, the song looping in a way that made Casey's skin crawl. Mason approached first. He touched the door and it creaked open slightly. Inside, it was dark. Too dark. He turned to make a joke, but the words never came. because then the door slammed shut and the truck vanished, just gone. No noise, no smoke, just air and trees. Mason was gone too. The other screamed. Casey stood frozen, breath caught in her throat. She called his name until her voice cracked, but the forest did not answer. They ran back to camp, but the trail was different now. Nothing looked the same. Landmarks had shifted or disappeared entirely. It took them until dawn to find the site again. Their tents were untouched, their backpacks still there. But Mason's things were gone, like he had never been there at all. The police were called. Search teams combed the woods. They found no trace, no evidence, no reason. Just 5 scared teenagers with a story no one believed. Casey did not sleep for days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fog on the window. She heard the Jingle spinning on repeat. The others tried to move on. Leah transferred schools. One of the boys stopped returning texts, but Casey could not forget. She returned to the forest a month later, alone. She followed the same trail, carried the same flashlight Mason had used. When the music returned, she walked toward it slow and steady. This time the truck was there before she arrived, waiting. The driver's window rolled down, but there was no face, only shadows. From the back, a voice called her name, Mason's voice. She didn't move, she didn't run, she whispered, "I'm sorry," and turned away. The music followed her for hours, but she never looked back. She never went into the clearing again. She told no one what happened that day. But something changed in her after that. She stopped pretending not to feel things deeply, stopped smiling when she wanted to scream, and she learned something simple. Curiosity is not always brave. Sometimes it's just another word for hunger, and some games are not meant to be played. Especially the ones that ask you to follow a song you were never supposed to hear. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods and hear something that does not belong, do not chase it. Trust the silence. It may be the only thing trying to keep you safe. And if this story reminded you of a friend you once followed too far, or a voice you almost believed, then stay with us. Let the stories guide you, not the music. Not every story starts with curiosity. Sometimes it begins with love. A mother and a child, a hike through nature, a moment when the world feels whole until a sound breaks through one that should not be there, and a choice must be made to trust instinct or trust the lie that says everything is fine. Our next step takes us to Silent Valley, where something as simple as a melody changes everything. Story 6, Never Follow the Song into the Woods. Harper used to believe that being a mother meant knowing everything. When Ben was born, she read every book memorized, every emergency contact kept their home spotless and quiet and safe. But now he was 6, and she had learned the truth. Motherhood was not certainty. It was watching your heart walk around outside of your body and realizing how little power you had to protect it. That truth was never more clear than the day they visited Silent Valley. It was supposed to be a break. Just a small picnic away from the chaos of town. A quiet morning hike through one of Connecticut's lesser-known preserves. Harper had found it online, praised for its beauty and isolation, a perfect spot for reflection. The woods were thick and the trails narrow, winding between stone walls and streams that murmured like lullabies. Ben loved it immediately. He darted ahead like he always did, chasing shadows and pointing out mushrooms. Harper followed closely, smiling but alert. She always stayed within 10 feet. That was the rule. 10 feet or less. But at the fork in the path, she blinked. Just once. Just long enough to adjust her bag, and he was gone. No sound, no laughter, just empty trail. She called his name. No answer. Her heart jumped into her throat as she ran down the right fork, convinced he had just gone ahead. But the trail curved sharply and ended at a moss-covered stone wall. No child, no footprints, nothing. She turned back, breath short, hands trembling. She checked the left path. She screamed. Still no answer. Then just as panic began to choke her, she heard it. A melody. Sweet and slow, distant but distinct. Ice cream truck music. Harper stopped cold. There was no road nearby, no parking lot, no reason for that sound to exist here. But it was real. She followed it. The trail narrowed, twisted. The trees pressed closer, and there it was. In the clearing stood an ice cream truck, faded yellow with cartoon decals, half peeled its tires sunken slightly into the earth. The music played from an old speaker mounted to the roof, its notes warped and dragging. The truck door was open. She saw movement inside. A child's silhouette. She ran, but the closer she got, the more the light seemed to bend. The truck looked older, not just neglected, but impossibly ancient, like it had been pulled from another decade and left to rot. She reached the clearing and stopped. The truck was empty. The music stopped. Ben was not there. Harper screamed his name until her throat gave out. Then she dropped to her knees, sobbing the earth cold beneath her. That was when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, heart hammering. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, tall in a ranger's uniform. His name tag read, Kyle. He asked if she had lost someone. She nodded. He said he had heard the music too. Once years ago, said he had looked for the source but found only silence and an old drawing nailed to a tree. A picture of a smiling truck surrounded by children with blank faces. He had quit the preserve for a while after that, but something pulled him back. It always did. Together, they searched for hours, calling, walking, repeating trails. At sunset, they found Ben near the entrance gate, sitting calmly on a rock. He said he had followed the music because it sounded happy. Said a man with no face offered him a popsicle. Said the truck disappeared. When he turned around, Harper held him until her arms shook. They went home. She said nothing to anyone, not to her family, not to Ben's school, not even to herself in the mirror. But she stopped taking him to the woods, stopped letting him play out of sight. She started sleeping with the light on. Months passed. One night as Ben brushed his teeth, he asked her if she remembered the truck. She said yes. He said he still heard the song sometimes. In his dreams, Harper stared at him, then told him to come sleep in her room. That night, she lay awake listening. Not for the music, but for the silence that came before it. She learned something that day in Silent Valley. Some sounds do not belong in certain places, and some invitations are not meant for children, especially not those who believe that every jingle is joy. If you are ever walking through a place that feels older than it looks, and you hear a tune that reminds you of something sweet from long ago, ask yourself why it is playing for you. Now, some memories are not meant to be trusted, and some smiles are just the shape fear takes when it wants to look friendly. If this story lingers in your thoughts the next time you take your child to the woods, let it. Let it make you careful. Let it make you stay close. And if you found yourself holding your breath as you read, wondering what you would have done, then stay with us. You are not alone in what you feel. There's a different kind of silence in cities, the kind built from walls and whispers, the kind that lingers long after the people have gone in the ruins of Cabrini Green. Old stories hum beneath the floorboards, and the jingle of an ice cream truck plays for those who remember what it took away. Not every haunting needs ghosts. Sometimes it only takes a memory and a basement door left unlocked. Story 7. Cabrini still remembers. Jalen never liked working nights in the tower. Cabrini Green had been partially demolished years ago, but one building still stood mostly empty, mostly forgotten. The city had plans to turn it into artists' lofts, but plans moved slowly when the shadows stretched this long. At 28, Jalen was hired to maintain what remained a skeleton crew job with long hours and little supervision. He was a quiet man, not because he had nothing to say, but because too many people had stopped listening. Most nights he patrolled the halls with his flashlight and clipboard radio clipped to his shoulder keys, rattling like wind chimes on his belt. The building sighed constantly, as if remembering every scream and silence it had ever swallowed. On the 15th floor, the lights flickered more than usual. The elevators groaned like old men, but it was the basement that held the weight of something else. Jalen had only gone down there a handful of times, always with purpose, always quick. The door was thick, steel with a rusted chain looped through the handle. Though the lock had long since broken, residents used to call that level the belly. Said it ate things, said it remembered. On a Tuesday in November, Jalen received a work order to check the electrical junctions below. The city was testing power for future renovations, and he was told to verify voltage. He cursed under his breath, but complied. As he descended the stairwell, the air turned colder, heavier. At the basement door, he hesitated. The chain hung limp. The lock was gone. Inside, the darkness was full and waiting. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut across damp concrete and graffiti peeled like old skin from the walls. As he moved through the corridor, the radio on his shoulder crackled. Then came a sound he hadn't heard since he was a boy. Ice cream music light. Cheerful, just off-key enough to feel wrong. The tune bounced along the hallway like it had been waiting years to play again. Jalen froze. The beam of his flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. He turned the corner and stopped. In the center of the maintenance floor sat a pale blue ice cream truck, its lights dim and flickering. The music playing from a speaker mounted on the roof. There were no tire marks, no heat from the engine, just stillness. And that song. The truck looked ancient. Mold grew in streaks along the panels. The back door was open. He stepped closer. Inside, he saw boxes. Old wooden crates stacked neatly, and sitting atop them were teeth. Small, white arranged like candies in rows. Jalen stepped back. Something in him shifted, not fear but memory. When he was 9, he had lived 2 floors above this one. Back when the building was alive and loud and full of children. He remembered his sister Yolanda talking about a man in an ice cream truck who came when the lights flickered. She said he gave out sweets that tasted like forgetting. One day she went to find him. She never came back. The police blamed a runaway story, but Jalen had always felt it was something else. He told himself that memory was wrong, but now the truck was here, and inside, sitting in the driver's seat, was a shape. A figure too still to be living, too detailed to be imagined. The face was hidden beneath shadow, but the smile was wide. Too wide. Jalen stumbled back, heart pounding. The radio on his shoulder crackled again. A voice broke through, whispering his name in a tone like wind through broken windows. He ran up the stairs, past rusted doors, past memories he no longer trusted. When he reached the lobby, the lights were back to normal. The basement door was chained again. The key on his ring was bent. No one believed him. No one investigated. But Jalen started to change. He walked slower through the halls, listened longer to the silence, and at night he dreamed of Yolanda. She stood beside the truck holding his hand, saying she remembered now that forgetting is never free. A week later, the security system logged movement on the basement level. Jalen checked the footage. The camera feed was static for 2 minutes. Then a single frame appeared. The truck, clear as glass. And in the window, his own reflection smiling too wide. Jalen left his job the next day, moved across the city, but the song followed. Played in his mind when he walked by playgrounds or when fluorescent lights flickered in stores. He learned something he could never unlearn, that in cities, some ghosts do not need to haunt, they wait. And when the right person hears the right song, they return. If you ever find yourself in an old building where time hangs heavy and music plays from nowhere, do not go looking. Some melodies are doors, some sweets are bait. And if this story reminded you of a place you once loved but no longer visit, there may be a reason. Stay curious, but cautious. And now, we leave the ruins and step into the open under the full moon, where belief and illusion dance together. Our final story drifts to Sedona, where spiritual seekers come looking for energy and answers, but find something sweeter and far more dangerous than expected when the trucks roll in and the lights begin to spin. The question is not what you are seeing, but what you are surrendering. Story 8, The Festival. No one remembers. Tasha had been chasing wonder for years. At 26, she had traded city nights and crowded brunches for desert mornings and energy readings. She told her followers it was about alignment and healing, finding beauty in forgotten spaces. But the truth was simpler. She had grown tired of noise and faces that change with every season. Sedona was supposed to be a turning point, a place with stillness deep enough to echo inside her. She rented a small casita off a dirt road framed by red rocks and silence. The owner, Alma, was soft-spoken and always watching her words, gentle but measured. She warned Tasha not to wander after dark during full moons, said the land remembered more than it revealed. Tasha smiled politely and promised to stay close, but the pull of the unknown had always been stronger than her promises. On her third night, just after midnight, she heard it, a jingle, thin and sweet, rising from the canyons like smoke. It was unmistakable, ice cream music. Out here in the middle of nowhere, it made no sense. She stepped onto the porch barefoot, the air cold against her skin. The sound drifted through the trees, not loud, not close, but clear. As if it knew her name, she grabbed her phone and flashlight and followed. The dirt path wound behind the casita, cutting through brush and stone. The further she walked, the sharper the music became. Its tempo uneven, like an old cassette struggling to keep rhythm. Then she saw them. Lights colorful and spinning like a fairground had bloomed overnight in the desert. At the center stood several ice cream trucks painted in pastel hues, surrounded by figures moving in slow circles. Children, adults, all silent, all smiling. The trucks glowed softly, headlights off their speakers, singing in unison. Tasha stepped closer, heart racing. Something about the scene felt surreal, not frightening, but suspended like a dream. Just before waking, a woman approached her. She wore a long red dress and no shoes. Her eyes were dark but kind. She handed Tasha a popsicle, purple and glistening. Tasha held it but did not eat. She asked where they were, what this was. The woman only smiled and said, "This was a gathering for the forgotten, a celebration of sweetness that never spoiled." Tasha looked around. The people had no shadows. Their movements were fluid but not human. A man stood nearby, half faded as if drawn in pencil, then slowly erased. She took a step back. The popsicle in her hand had begun to melt, but the drip was colorless, like water from a cracked pipe. She turned to leave, but the path was gone. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. The music had grown louder, less charming now, more like a command. She closed her eyes, focused on her breath, remembered Alma's warning. When she opened her eyes again, the lights were dimmer. The trucks flickered, the figure slowed. She walked backward until her foot hit the edge of the original trail. Then she ran, back through the brush, heart pounding, lungs tight. She did not stop until she reached the casita. Alma was waiting on the porch. She said nothing, just opened the door and let Tasha inside. The next morning, Alma placed a bowl of fruit on the table and said only this: "Some things come dressed in delight." Not all sweetness is meant for swallowing. Tasha left Sedona 3 days later. She posted no photos from that night, told no stories. But her followers noticed a change. Her captions became quieter, her smile more thoughtful. She spoke of boundaries and listening to instinct, of joy with edges. She never heard the music again, but sometimes she woke with the taste of something artificial on her tongue and the sound of laughter that did not belong to her. She began to understand that wonder, when untethered, can become something else. A hunger that leads you where no one should go alone. She learned that curiosity is sacred, but it must be guided. Not every light is meant to be followed. Not every hand that offers something is offering kindness. If you ever find yourself called by a sound that feels out of place, if the sweetness you're offered arrives in silence and shadow, step back. Trust your sense of wrongness. It is not fear, it is memory. And if this story has made you pause before chasing something that promises too much too easily, then let it stay with you. Let it protect you. As the final melody fades into the desert wind and the lights from Sedona dim behind us, what remains is not fear, but stillness. The kind that follows after something brushes too close to the soul. We have traveled far tonight, from the streets of Savannah to the shadows beneath New York, through forests, deserts, ruins, and places where time does not flow straight. And what lingers now is not just what we saw, but what we felt, what we almost followed, and what we now know cannot be unseen. And as we step back from the edge of these stories, what waits ahead is a silence heavy with meaning. A moment to breathe before the last note is played. Now that the music is faded and the wheels have gone quiet, we are left with what lingers in the silence. The stories you just heard came from different corners of the country, but they share a thread, a melody that binds them in unease, the kind that slips into your thoughts when everything else goes still. Perhaps you recognize something in them, a place you once passed, a moment you almost followed, a tune you thought was only in your memory, but now it feels closer, and maybe that is the lesson. Hidden between the words that the things we forget will often return when we least expect them. The ice cream truck is a symbol of joy of childhood, but when it appears in places it should not. When it calls to people, it should never reach it, become something else. It becomes a gate, and tonight you stepped close to the edge of it, and if you felt a chill, not from the stories themselves, but from what they leave behind, then you are not alone. That feeling is real, and it is what binds us here on this channel. We do not chase fear for shock or spectacle. We trace it to its quiet roots, where the strange meets the deeply human. And if you have stayed until the end, we thank you not just for your time, but for your trust. Because listening to stories like these is not just curiosity, it is courage. So stay aware, stay grounded, and the next time you hear a familiar jingle drifting through the night, pause and ask yourself, is it really meant for you, or for the part of you that still believes? If you have not yet joined us, subscribe and let us continue walking the edge of the veil together.